Good day, everyone. In my last video, I discussed my thoughts on Tokyo Ghost and Ranzarox by Liberatore and Tamburini. Today's video will be about Tokyo Ghost and the most recent issue. But before I get to it, this week I came across some Phil Spector produced music from the 60s. His work with the Ronettes and the Crystals. I bought the recent issue of Tokyo Ghost, and normally I don't listen to music when I read, but I decided to do it this evening, that particular evening. And I listened to the Ronettes and the Crystals as I read Tokyo Ghost. And I realized that there was a wonderful synchronicity between the current issue, which is about our heroes and how they met when they were children, and the music. I mean, songs by the Crystals, which I think many of you are familiar with, it says, "And Then He Kissed Me," and "Little Boy," and then from the Ronettes, "Be My Baby," "Soldier Baby of Mine," "Baby I Love You," and "Walking in the Rain" are some songs that just kept playing over and over again as I read this issue. And then when I finished it, and something kept popping into my head, and I kept thinking about our heroine in the story, Debbie Jacobs. I have a picture of her here. There isn't a really good one here of her, but let's see, there maybe. And I kept thinking of Debbie Harry, the lead singer of Blondie. And a picture of her there. And I wonder if Remender and the artist Murphy of this book took the likeness of Debbie Harry and her name and gave it to Davy. She just got in this issue, this first issue, Debbie Jacobs. And then what I did was I reread the first issue and the second issue with the soundtrack of early Blondie. And the songs I kept replaying were Underground Girl, Susie and Jeffrey, Denis, Sex Offender, and The Beautiful Angels on the Balcony. And then the French version of Sunday Girl. And one more. A live version of David Bowie's Heroes, one of my favorite songs. And listening to Blondie with the first issue, which is filled with mayhem, was just wonderfully appropriate. And the second issue with the Ronettes, music from the 60s, very romantic, almost innocent to some degree, and just worked really well. Now, the world of Tokyo Ghost, it's a science fiction story. It takes place in LA, and I think in the year 2089, or close to the end of that century, where people are just so dependent on technology. There's no work. Everything is done by machines, and so people just have to be constantly entertained, to the point that most people have implants where you can get any emotion, any fantasy just appears. And also your brain can be tapped, and where your adrenaline can just increase, making you quite strong, changing your physical appearance. And it's extreme narcissism. The heroes of our story, Debbie and her boyfriend, Led Dent. Led in particular, well, Ded has an implant and he's completely addicted. He needs to be constantly entertained. Debbie does not. Now, when you have the implant, you're susceptible to manipulation. And in the first issue, you had a man named Davy, this man here, who is able to tap into anything electronic. It could be a machine, or it could be a person who's got one of these implants, and manipulate them. Debbie does not have one. So they capture him here, and the reason they're looking for him is a man named, I think his name is Flack. Yeah. A man named Flack. This is issue number 2. That's him right there. He produces many of these terrible television shows that people are addicted to, and people, even this is his bath water. His loyal followers drink from it, and like he says, you got to keep the people entertained constantly. And the reason he wanted this Davy guy was he was created in Japan, and he wants to know how this happened, how this man could be able, this Davy character, is able to tap into the minds and in anything that he wants. And so he sends him to Japan, and the contract is once they do so, our hero, Led Dent or Teddy, will no longer be, basically, he'll be free. One, they don't have to longer work for him, but also maybe free from this addiction to technology. Now in Japan, for some reason, technology does not exist, and so if you come in within a mile, there's some kind of field that shuts off all technology. So this man wants him to go there to find some warlord, kill him, and bring back some of the natural resources back, and also see what technology they have, which at least at one point they had, not anymore, where they could create someone like this Davy character. But the most fascinating thing about this story is, again, the origin story. And when they're children, Debbie's father was a police officer before the police was disbanded and turned into private security firms. And their father went out of his way not to have his daughter touch the internet or have any contact with it of any kind. He had her play outside, he had her do survival skills, how to build things, how to just basically live without dependence on technology. The mother, unfortunately, is addicted to technology 24/7. And one day she meets her neighbor, this little boy whose parents hate him because they're too absorbed in themselves that they could care less about their child. And so the little boy is hooked on technology, but she says, hey, let's go and play. And they find a library, and they read. They read books, and they talk. Actual conversations. But something terrible happens at one point where the masculinity of the boy is challenged. And what he resorts to supplement for it, he decides to become, as he grows up, a police officer. And by this point, the budding romance has ensued. And again, that's why the music from the Ronettes is so appropriate for this series, for this issue. And to become a police officer, you're going to have implants, and to make you physically stronger. But what happens at this point, the little boy already has a predisposition to technology. He enjoyed it very much when he was a kid, before Debbie took him away from that. And so he becomes hooked on it. And he overcompensates for his weakness as a teenage boy into a brutal, almost sadistic sort of enforcer. And in our story, they eventually make it to Japan. So, what I just found just interesting about the story, it made me think of other stories. And Ray Bradbury, in 1953, wrote a story called The Murderer. And there a man, he's being treated by a psychiatrist because what he's killed his phone, he's killed his television, he's killed his little watch, which is, I guess at the time was the iPhone. People were just hooked to it. And so he's destroyed all these things, and in the society that Bradbury has created in The Murderer, people have constant noise. When you walk into a room, there's music playing, and people need to be, they're on a train or on a bus, and they're on their watches. But this man rejects all this, and so he's thought he's insane. In 1977, J.G. Ballard, a writer I mentioned last week, wrote a short story called The Intensive Care Unit, where virtual reality controls everybody. What I mean by that is you can have a doctor. Doctor never has to leave his or her home. Everything is there. If you're going to have a child, machines connected to your home have it for you, and the child is raised somewhere else. If you want to go to Paris, you don't have to go to Paris because the virtual reality of your home provides the smells, the taste, the feel of being in Paris. So people never leave. But what happens is no one ever has human contact. And in that story by Ballard, at one point people decide to have human contact after never experiencing it, never being able to look at the person the way they really look instead of their visual that they provide on the screen. And also never touching a person, but also never smelling a person. Human smell. And the results are catastrophic. And finally, in the 60s, there was, I want to say on CBS, Rod Serling wrote an incredible screenplay, remarkable screenplay, where he did a Cold War version of A Christmas Carol, and it was called A Carol for Another Christmas. And it had Robert Shaw starred in it, the great Sterling Hayden, and Peter Sellers. And Hayden plays Scrooge. And it's, again, with the backdrop is the Cold War. And when we get to the part of the future, he's being led around by these people, by these ghosts. In the future, there's a nuclear war. And he meets up with Peter Sellers and some survivors. And Peter Sellers has this cowboy hat and suggests he's from Texas. Now, I know something about that, so I know, so it makes perfect sense to me. And he is the imperial meme. And it basically is, eventually he wants to get rid of everybody until there can only be one person. Him. Me. Which is the logical consequence of extreme narcissism, where it's just you. And when I read these, again, Tokyo Ghost, and the world that is created by Remender and Murphy, you have that sort of world, and where you have people like Debbie Harry, I don't know, Debbie Jacobs, Debbie Harry, who just reject that, but everyone else is just, it's the norm. And I mentioned that one of the songs I was listening to was Blondie's rendition of David Bowie's Heroes. And I couldn't help thinking that unlike the amoral heroes from Ransrocks and Lubna, a very nihilistic story, amoral characters, they are not the mirror image of our heroes in Tokyo Ghost, but they're opposites, the Dorian Grays. There's romance in this book. There's no romance in Ransrocks. At least in our story, like in David Bowie's wonderful song, maybe Debbie and Teddy can be heroes, at least for one day. Thanks for viewing.